South Africa is very similar to the rest of the world, and in some ways it's very different. The World Health Organization, for example, says around the world the prevalence of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is around 1.5%. That's the projection. South Africa has among the highest reported prevalence rates in the world, with rates as high as 28%. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder in some communities. I'm joined now by Professor Keith Bolton from the Rahima Moosa Mother and Child Hospital. Professor Bolton, good afternoon to you. There'll be complicated reasons for this, but why is our rate of this so much higher, and why is it so much higher in some communities than the rest of the world?
Stephen, I'm not 100% sure I have the answer to it, but in all probability, I think that we're not aware of it as much as other countries are. I think we were slow to get onto the bandwagon, or get onto that. I guess it's not a bandwagon, but it's a wagon. And now we're catching up and overtaking everybody else. So I think a lack of understanding in the public, by the public, as to the dangers of alcohol during pregnancy.
So we don't, I suppose it's difficult to know if the prevalence rate in South Africa is going up or if we're just becoming more aware of it.
I think that it's a bit of both. I certainly am old enough to have seen a change and to have observed an obvious increase. I think our population the women in our population have become more drinkers, more inclined to drink like their fathers. I think the women didn't used to drink a lot. Traditional South African women didn't used to drink much. Their husbands, brothers and boyfriends did. And now I think they are drinking socially and excessively sometimes.
I mean, what we've seen, I suppose, and I think we'll see this across all communities in our country actually, is that they are in certain pockets, I mean, not everywhere, but in certain pockets, you just see more alcohol being consumed more regularly. It's not just about how much alcohol South Africa drinks, it's about how it's drunk.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Initially, fetal alcohol syndrome in South Africa was put at the door of the DOP system of paying people in alcohol in the Western Cape on the wine farms, and that was where the initial sort of discovery of fetal alcohol syndrome in our country occurred. But that's no longer the case. The places where people are drinking are all over the country, far from any wine farms, and they're paying for it in cash.
What happens to children who suffer from this? I mean, the consequences of it are lifelong.
Yeah, it varies. It's a whole spectrum. It used to be just the fetal alcohol syndrome, and that involved some obvious facial abnormalities and other limb abnormalities and so on, with behavioral, intellectual, and social problems. Now we know the full spectrum. You can have milder cases without any physical suggestions, or the full-blown syndrome. We now talk about fetal alcohol effect as a fairly common condition, whereas fetal alcohol syndrome, the worst example of it, is a little bit less common.
We know as adults that alcohol has an effect on our brains. What does it do to unborn babies?
Yeah, well, it's the fetus that takes it very badly. So alcohol crosses the placenta. There's no barrier to the transfer of alcohol from mother's bloodstream into baby's bloodstream. And when it gets into the baby's bloodstream, if it's at a typical time of development, especially of the brain in the first part of pregnancy, then it is highly damaging. It's not always predictable, and that's why there's no real safe level of alcohol at which a person can say, I'm only drinking so much, I'm not reaching that level. And that's because, like all diseases, fetal alcohol syndrome has genetic and environmental factors. So some fetuses have inherited more ability to get damage, if you like, and some people are more protective, but you don't know who they are and you can't predict it. So you can't say, oh, I'm sure my fetus is okay. You know, and we can't say how much alcohol is damaging.
I mean, there are obviously social campaigns, you know, that people who are pregnant should not drink. Do we know if those actually work, if they have an impact? And I mean, it's very tempting to lay a lot of blame at the alcohol industry here. They've come in for a lot of blame over the last year. Hard to see why that blame would be wrong.
Yes, I think there's sort of two kind of groups. I mean, it's probably a spectrum, but there are two kind of groups, and that is there's the social drinker who doesn't abuse alcohol usually, and drinks in moderation or a little if at all, and then probably has binges. Now, a binge is what a non-drinking doctor calls a party. So people who drink a lot on a Saturday night, and often, as I would know, you don't always predict it's going to happen. You start off thinking, I'll just have one, and then the drink takes a drink, and then the drink takes the bang, And so a binge, one single binge at a critical time in the pregnancy can cause the full-blown spectrum. So there's that part of it where we need to educate people to say, if you're pregnant or you're planning to get pregnant, don't drink. Then there's the other group who are habitual drinkers and perhaps heavy drinkers. They're at greatest risk. And if you are a habitual or heavy drinker, then don't get pregnant. So it's a kind of a two-edged sword.
We've been talking about alcohol, but I mean, we know that smoking has an impact as well, and sometimes one does come with the other.
Yes. Now, smoking's effect on the fetus, and the smoking's got very bad press, and so it should have. I'm not for a moment suggesting you should smoke, but smoking's effect on the fetus is modest at all. It causes a little bit of growth retardation, a little bit of failure of the fetus to grow to full extent, even in heavy smokers. However, the postnatal effects on the baby and the child, the passive smoking that occurs after birth, that's the danger of smoking, really, rather than in the womb. Whereas alcohol, it's a devastating effect on the fetus.
Professor, do you appreciate
it's the worst. It's worse than the hard drugs, alcohol. It's
sure.
It's just.
Professor Keith Bolton, I have to leave it there. Thank you from the Rahima Moosa Mother and Child Hospital. I do appreciate the time.